Hey everybody, welcome back to the Edge Report. This is the first episode of season 4 where we're going to actually start to explore what stable living looks like, how communities build balance between growth, place, and people. We're talking an operating systems approach to the total cost of living this season, rather than the narrow approach of affordable housing. So today we're heading to the coast of Maine, to the town of Newcastle. It's a small, tight-knit community of just under a couple thousand people, right on the Damariscotta River. It was once a shipbuilding hub, and Newcastle is now focused on thoughtful planning and preserving its coastal character and adapting to the future. So with us today, I've got Kevin Sutherland, who's the town manager, to talk about how they're shaping a stable path forward for this beautiful, historic New England town. Welcome to the show, Kevin.
Thank you, Chris. Great to be here.
So my first question is, did I pronounce Damariscotta right?
You did. It is Damariscotta, and there is a town, Damariscotta, on the other side of the river. There are twin village town, so we do a lot in collaboration with the little town of Damariscotta as well. So collectively, a population of about 5,000.
So that's perfect. That's where I wanted to start. For this will reach probably a lot of people. I've had the luxury and privilege of spending a lot of summertime up in Maine, having grown up in Connecticut. So for the listeners who don't know, help paint the picture of exactly where Newcastle is along that rocky coast of Maine.
Yeah, so you hit Portland, and you're in food scene Mecca, and brewery Mecca. And if you continue on Route 1, you go through Brunswick, Bath, where Bath Iron Works is, big naval shipbuilding community. And the populations of these towns are not big. We're talking under 10,000. So Portland's the largest community in Maine of about 70,000 people, the largest. And everything from there just gets smaller and smaller, and further out you go. There are over 400 towns in Maine. So it's this very small, get to know your community, get to know the quirks and the people and the fun spots to check out. So you further up the coast, you go past Bath, Wiscasset, who self-proclaim themselves as the prettiest little village in the world. Mm-hmm. Self-proclaimed. Or might be just Maine. Still self-proclaimed. And then beyond Wiscasset, you run into other coastal communities, a lot of peninsulas along the coast of Maine. But along Route 1, you hit Newcastle's next, Edgecombe, Newcastle, and then Damariscotta. And on Route 1, you cross over the Damariscotta River, which is from Maine. 80% of oysters that come from Maine come from this river.
Okay.
So we have many, many oyster farms along the stretch of this river. And the sort of pinch point is the downtown Damariscotta, Newcastle. Beyond that is where it comes off the lake, Damariscotta Lake. So it's really picturesque. Most recently, there was a New York Times article about Pumpkin Fest, which is an event that happens the second weekend of October, around Columbus Day, Indigenous Peoples Day. That event continues to grow every year, and now that it's been showcased in the New York Times, I think we're actually going to have to close down Main Street for next year.
Awesome.
But what they do is they grow giant pumpkins, and have several events around that, including every storefront decorates, either carving or painting the pumpkins and sets them outside on the sidewalk. They have an event where they have actually turned them into vessels. So there's a kayaking competition where people are sitting inside a giant pumpkin and kayaking around the bay. There's another event where they have a motorized, and sometimes they flip over just because of the weight distribution. It's hilarious. There's a giant pumpkin dropping. They drop it 100 feet onto a car. I don't know, just quirky things you do with giant pumpkins. Challenges is crowds get bigger, logistics get harder, safety becomes a concern, but it's a wonderful event and has been happening for 20-something years now, long before I was here.
Very cool. And then, traveling up Route 1 more, you get to sort of northern Maine, right up towards Acadia, and so
Yep.
further and further away from
Rockland. You missed Camden, then Belfast, and then Searsport, and all of these towns have these little niches of community food stops, like if you haven't been to Maine, you haven't driven coastal Maine and all the way up to Bar Harbor, or beyond, there's some pretty cool spots further beyond. But I could talk about Maine. I could just spend this episode totally just talking about Maine because I love it, and there's so much to explore and see and do here.
There is, and that sort of leads us into how you got to Newcastle, right? And your visions and the what you're hearing from the community and what you're planning on doing. It sounds like there's a ton of opportunity in rural economic development. I know there is down here in North Carolina, very similar. 321 and the Blue Ridge Parkway follow, sort of the top of the Appalachian Mountains all the way down into the Smokies. Every town is different. Every town has opportunity. At the same time, that comes with some challenges. So let's unpack that a little bit. Let's start with how you got to Newcastle and what you're doing.
Well, I cut my teeth in Ithaca, New York. And when I moved to Maine in 2015, I took a job in Saco, and it's one of the more urban towns. And I was trying to make the argument, hey, and of course in Ithaca you can walk or bike everywhere, or walk through the gorge up to Cornell University. But when I moved to Maine, I said, look, you could actually live here without a car. And people looked at me like I was crazy. So as the city administrator in Saco, I also bought a house downtown, and I proved them. I got rid of my cars, and I rented a car when I absolutely needed it. But other than that, I took the train, or I walked, or I biked to everything I needed to. And then I ended up in Bar Harbor, which is a challenging community, but picturesque. So I've explored, the urban side of it, and then the very rural side of it, but very tourist driven. And the community is somewhat challenged by that because you have the efforts for business and the outdoor experience. And then I took a break from local government just because I was burned out. It was a challenging town. And I got a call from the planning board chair in Newcastle. And he said, hey, we just lost our town manager. Would you be interested in coming down and being the interim? So I came down and I dated Newcastle for a while. Mm-hmm. And I learned that they had already gone through a comprehensive plan process, which involved a lot of the community and was very successful. They started in 2016. They got approved in June of 2018. And that comprehensive plan was also paired with actually switching from their land use ordinance was, Euclidean, very focused on one thing is here, use-based, huge distances, nothing that matched what was actually in Newcastle. Mm-hmm. They switched it to a form-based code, fully form-based for the whole town. Of course, the rest of the community, we're town meeting form of government, so you have to get approval by the select board, and then you actually have to take it to town meeting to get approvals. Mm-hmm. They weren't so keen on a fully form-based, so we sort of have a hybrid form-based code. Okay. And that's more focused on the downtown areas, the areas where you're actually going to see more development. The rural area is still very Euclidean in terms of how it's approached. But when I reviewed those documents, I said, you guys have huge opportunity here to see the kind of development you want that's going to offset the tax rate and actually keep taxes stable, if not see some decline if you do development correctly. And they've lined it up correctly, both in their comprehensive plan, outlining that, and then format for their zoning. So it's ripe for development. So, that's one of the reasons I said, yeah, I'd love to work in this town. Also, the select board is very forward thinking. They're trying to address matters and they're working collaboratively rather than against each other. When there are naysayers, they are actually brought into the conversation. So I can't imagine working in a different town today.
Cool. Yeah, it sounds like you've got a lot of the tools, at your fingertips, or at least enough of the inertia behind that change that those bridges have been built for you, which is amazing. That's so much of the struggle when it comes to the toolkits and the advisory capacity that I provide is, it's just steeped in sort of that Euclidean thinking. And we have to create a better way to allow for economic development opportunities to present themselves to our rural areas. I was just at a couple weeks ago, I was at a North Carolina rural areas economic summit, and it was amazing just to talk about what kind of tools you have. You mentioned, Route 1, that's such an amazing tourism opportunity to become your own town. So, what would stop me if I were driving up one to stop, what would cause me to stop in Newcastle?
Uh, Obviously, it's mostly not Newcastle. That's the challenge, and that's what part of this effort in the comprehensive plan was to change. Is you get off of Route 1 on the old Route 1, so 1B, which is the business district. So if you stay on 1, you're just going to skip right past Newcastle and Damariscotta. But if you're heading down one of the peninsulas down to Bristol, it's a really famous lighthouse at the end of it. So if you're a lighthouse tour, there's like 64 of them in Maine.
Mm-hmm.
If you're just doing lighthouses, you're obviously going to swing through because you can't get there without coming through Newcastle.
Uh-huh.
So there's that aspect of it, and then obviously the historic downtown Damariscotta with all of the brick buildings that are connected to each other. That has a real draw. And Rennie's is a retail shop that's been in Maine, and their anchor store is in Damariscotta. So there are a couple of real, and obviously some great restaurants. But if you're coming through here, you want to stop in Damariscotta. Now, Newcastle has recognized, like, look, we have this opportunity. We have this downtown space, and all of our buildings are pushed too far back from the road. As they change hands, how do we encourage that redevelopment to actually create the downtown we want to mirror or identify as part of Damariscotta? So if you're from away and you drive through here, you think it's all one town.
Mm.
But it's clear that when you go across the river, there's one side has more development, one side does not have much. What's another challenge for me is my town office is literally on the main street. We're in our value, the land value. This is not the highest and best use of this. So I have to figure out how to get myself out of here so that I can get somebody to develop this site. Next to us, there's an old gas station car repair shop that had been converted into a restaurant. It's called the Shuck Station, and it is a very popular spot, and it's brought people in. So you start to see, oh, here's opportunity. There's something happening here. So when they're done running that restaurant or want to see real development there, the owner is ready, and the guy who runs the restaurant is ready. So there's growing excitement around it, and a lot of it has to do with what our zoning now says we can do versus what we could do before.
So let me go macro on this for a second. One of our projects that we're working on right now is for civil servants, and it's a pocket neighborhood infill development. And we formally buried the word affordable housing because we don't believe that that's good enough. We feel like that's one symptom. We're talking about stable living.
Yep.
And how that pocket infill development can actually benefit the greater good of the community. So our project at Hudson Commons specifically is designed for civil servants to create stable living opportunities for nurses and teachers and first responders. What's the environment like for you there in Newcastle with attracting and retaining talent?
Well, we're very similar in the struggles of the ambulance service that serves 5 towns here or 6 towns here. They can't get anybody to come work for them, in part because those folks can't find housing. Mm-hmm. It's similarly with the high school is an independent school in Maine, so it's essentially private, yet it brings the high school kids from the couple of surrounding towns in. So it's public-private high school. They struggle to hire from outside a very small circumference around the high school. Mm-hmm. So if they had access to housing, they might be able to attract talent from beyond that circumference. Our hospital, we have a hospital in Damariscotta. They struggle to find space for nurses, and so it's not necessarily the low poverty. It's just people who provide the services for the community.
That's right.
Talking to the restaurant owner, he says, I struggle to find. He bought a house and rents and has his staff work there in the summertime, mm-hmm. or live there in the summertime while they're working for the restaurant. Mm-hmm. So it's a real challenge here, and it's not just I make just enough not to meet 80% or even 100% of AMI, but I still can't find somewhere to live, or
Yeah,
if it's an hour away.
And that's a real problem because it creates this disconnect in community. It's much more where I grew up. I grew up in New England. I grew up in a small town called Orange, Connecticut. Volunteer fire department. It had community because we were all in sort of the same world, right? The police, fire, medic, nurses all lived and worked in the same community. When they have to commute in, they're serving in a community that they're not necessarily identifying with. So, there's some real challenges nationally. I'll throw some numbers out. Our salaried wage right now is trailing 60% of our median home price.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to spend more than about 25% of your gross income on your living expense. And that's what people say. Hey, it's no different than when I was a kid. Interest rates were 14%. I don't understand why this home ownership thing is so hard. It's because the cost of living, maintenance, gas, food, childcare, all the other things were not trailing wage. So, that's been one of the things that we're focused on with Pathway Communities, is creating upward mobility and really trying to stabilize the civil servants, the folks who have chosen to go into professions not for monetary consideration, but because they're of service. And
Right.
it seems to me like the next play for a lot of different towns is going to be to attract and retain talent through a stable living environment.
Yeah, I'm really hoping to replicate that here, and that can lead into sort of what fell into our hands recently. So
Yeah, let's do that. Share the story that you shared with me a couple weeks ago.
yeah, the town of Newcastle acquired a parcel in tax foreclosure, and it happens to be a vacant piece of land in the downtown, or right around the corner from Main Street. So extremely beneficial when it comes to adding walkable, bikeable parts to this community. But with acquiring that, the question became, well, what do we do with it? And the Supreme Court ruling that happened a year ago now, where basically said tax foreclosures are a taking by the government. So our state legislature put in a law that says if a town acquires a parcel in tax foreclosure, the board, the body, either the legislative body, or in this case the select board, because that power had been given to the select board, is to make a determination: do you keep it for municipal use? Do you sell it back to the former owner, essentially for the taxes due, or do you put it on the market and get it up the market? The whatever is acquired through the market is then taxes paid off, and then the rest of the money is given to the former owner. Mm-hmm. Well, if we decided to keep it for municipal use, but even in that case, we still had to have it appraised, and then we had to pay the former owner the value of the appraisal minus what they were owed for taxes and some of my time and the attorney's time. So that resulted in us having to come up with about $80,000 to pay for this piece of 1.2 acres in downtown, near the downtown. I'd call it downtown Newcastle. So that was initially a challenge, but I got a grant. The county gave our town $120,000 to address housing needs, and I marketed it as addressing first responder. So ambulance and fire. We have a volunteer fire department, so trying to think about how I can make sure that if you come live in this community, we expect you to also work or to be a volunteer with our fire department, which you get paid for. It's not a full-time job or anything, but it's something you supplement essentially you're living with. Mm-hmm. And then number 2 was to address municipal and school employees. Mm-hmm. And third would be not-for-profit employees. Mm-hmm. Like I'm trying to think about how that, and that was the pitch for the grant. So we got the grant for $120,000, spent $80,000 to acquire it. We're now spending another roughly $20,000 to have due diligence report, like what the soil conditions are, what can we do with this parcel. That came back basically clean slate. I'm sure we got some storm drain issue, stormwater runoff that's going to have to be addressed, but other than that, it's good to go. And now we're also working with a architecture firm to come up with some site plan design concepts. How many units do we want to try to squeeze in there? What can be done within the zoning? Will we need to make some zoning adjustments in order to do a bigger project, or what we can get through or approved by the community? So we're in that stage right now. Not entirely sure what's going to come of it, but got some general concepts from the architect just yesterday that we'll take to the board later this month or beginning of December. So, and I'll also say that I've had this incredible select board, like very forward thinking. They have recognized that we don't want to hand this off to someone to develop. We actually want to do it, in part because I think we want to create a model for the state to say, look, this stuff isn't going to get done unless we're involved in it. And I'd rather be involved all the way to the finish line where we hand the keys over to somebody else than to expect or hope that it gets done by somebody else.
Yep.
And it's just, the market conditions right now, it's either you got to make bank or they're going to walk away.
Yeah. And, so much of that is what really kind of led to our initial conversation, which is leading to this conversation. We're exploring with Pathway Communities, we're even exploring the entity formation in and of itself, let alone the services that we could offer, because we're going down this sort of notion, tracking down this notion of open source and toolkits, and being forward thinking about open sourcing those toolkits. So, what are the various tools that the different town planners and the different managers and the different councils have in their bag of tricks, so to speak, to create stable living, not affordable housing. And that's, a much different lens to look at things than, the traditional developer, limited partner, general partner, internal rate of return, capital stack, JV, out, now it's your asset to manage kind of thinking. What ends up happening a lot of times in that is, especially when you're placating AMI and you're making inferences to people's affordability, if it ever goes public market, it's going to go market rate, and then you've lost your affordability in perpetuity. So how do you deed restrict, or how do you land grant, or how do you use whatever tools you have to encumber in a positive way stability long term? Have you thought through any of that yet, or is that on the radar?
Yeah, it's on the radar. It's all the things that are the conversations we're having right now are around a lot of this. Like what ultimately do we want to try to achieve? And it is the stability. I also know that we're really focused on low carbon footprint or no carbon footprint, net zero. Those approaches will help reduce the cost of utilities on the site, or reduce the cost of heating and cooling. So those are very important components to this. But it is like, all right, how do I make sure that that I can focus on trying to get people who are going to go work for the ambulance service? How do I make sure I can fill spots with teachers or educators?
Yeah.
And without then saying, well, you're not any of those, you can't live here.
Yeah.
So I'm still in that very exploratory, how can I do this here in Maine? And I've made some inroads with a couple of consultants and attorneys and others who are helping to facilitate this. But yeah, once we have it, my intent is to share it. This isn't proprietary. I'm not keeping this for the town of Newcastle. I'm not keeping this for myself. I want to be able to go to the other town managers in my region and say, here's a solution to this. Take that piece of property you still haven't even made a decision on, and do something with it.
Well, and we have a lot of town managers' eyes on our Hudson Commons project, because they're all very interested in what we're doing. And it's, one of the things that has enabled us some creativity or ability to be creative is that it's all private funded. So, the town worked with us to give us the density that we needed and rezoned it in no time.
Yeah.
And also made additional offers to consider, easing some of the parking restrictions in the state of North Carolina. We've got some pretty archaic parking restriction concerns. And what we're trying to do is create walkability to Main Street. So, with small area plans, my experience here in Charlotte, North Carolina, is if you want to increase walkability, you have to actually put parking restrictions, parking maximums on properties, not minimums.
Yep.
Which is different thinking. And then also they have another tool in their toolkit that they can start to waive tap fees or give us access to water and sewer, you know, in exchange for things like using a microgrid, where we're now not going to tap our utility capacity because we're going to use a microgrid. And we are building to net zero energy, if not close to exceeding or surpassing net zero energy. We're using heat pumps. We're building to construction science, thermodynamic standards. We're building to building enclosure standards. We're not building to code. We're building way past code because we want $20 power bills. You know, we want to use photovoltaics not because we think they're a good idea. They are a good idea. So we're going to put them into the mix. We're not going to have the discussion about politics and utilities and whether or not they're coming. We're putting them in because we can. You know, and allowing those that switch gear to turn houses into auxiliary power supplies for other houses. You know, there are all sorts of systems that are out there that don't necessarily cost more money, but at the design table, your partners at the A&E level are extremely important. And most, no shame, I'm not throwing shade, they just don't know. Because they're continuing to build to what they know. They're continuing to build to GPLP. They're building by square footage. They're building based on activity-based design that's still pretty archaic. Or, you know, is there a product market mix inside of that? The 22-year-old nurse doesn't need 1,200 square feet. He or she needs 500 square foot studio. Does that exist in Newcastle? Does that product exist in Newcastle? How about the 2-bedroom walkout townhouse or the single family home that is just a patio home with no backyard? That product market mix is really, really, really important because it has to follow their traditional progression as well. That nurse might want a dog. They might find a partner. They might have an aging parent that needs to come in and move in with them. Now they do need the second bedroom, or they have to supplement their work with remote work. Do they have an office space? So a lot of the activity-based design and a lot of the traditional code-based development from A&E firms is just the way we always did it. So they just drop that into the programming. And that's really what you need to push back on, at least that we found. We've pushed completely away from hiring an architect and engineer firm until we need them. And we've created an integrated project development team that has a ton of experience doing this to recreate our whole standards.
So, you know, I still have some resources and there's potential for more grant funding to think about building that team to make sure that what gets built is as efficient as possible and addresses those varying degrees of need. You're right. I mean, mostly it's single family houses here. A project just got done, and in part because the zoning changed all those years ago, where we don't have parking requirements in the downtown. It's not maximums or minimums. It's just there is no parking requirement. And he put in, if that old zoning was still in place, he wouldn't have been able to put the 2 8-unit 1-bedrooms on the site. But he was able to do that and address some parking needs for it. But I guess 1 parking spot per unit, which I think might be overkill. But they're going live tomorrow. Move-in day is tomorrow. So 16 units on 1 parcel. The buildings are they look good. They fit in the character of the neighborhood, but they address a need that hasn't existed here, which is, I don't need I'm a nurse who doesn't have a family. I just moved here after school. I need 500 square feet. And but what we're seeing is a lot of the requests are, I used to have that 4-bedroom house. My kids moved out. My husband passed away. I just need a place to live. I don't want to shovel. I don't want to have to deal with the lawn. Just give me a place to live in the downtown. So I'm finding a lot of those too.
Yeah, and age in place is obviously upward mobility for civil servants is super important at the beginning of your career, and then sort of at the end of your time. Well, I won't put it that way, but it's age in place brings a different perspective to community living because, to your point, you're not necessarily thinking about upward mobility. You're thinking about getting rid of a lot of the crap that you've assimilated or assembled over the years and simplifying your life. couple of projects I want to talk about.
Yes, I'm not even ready for that, and I have a lot of crap I need to get rid of. So
that's what we're doing with Pathway Communities, especially with Hudson Commons. Like, we're developing with our kids in mind. I have a 16 and 18-year-old kid, and my daughter wants to be a nurse. So I'm looking at her future and saying, there's nowhere for you to live. Like, you're going to pay rent, you're going to drive an hour. Like, anyway, so that's the upward mobility, really the impetus behind the design of stable living comes from the inspiration of my 16-year-old daughter that has expressed that she wants to be a nurse. And there's a whole traveling nurse program, so you can incorporate some of the development in that. But I wanted to highlight Duke Street Cottages, who is in a small town called Granite Falls, North Carolina. Rob Howard Building Sciences, one of our board members, he sort of set out on the same path. He had just under an acre in Granite Falls, and had a good relationship with town planning and city management as well, and said, "Hey, I got this crazy idea, but I want to put like 11 houses on an acre." And they were like, "What?" And he said, "Look, we can do it. I think that it's a missing middle product, and not only do we want to do it, but I'm not going to stick build them. I want to move towards volumetric design, and I want to move towards industrialized construction. So I'm going to start with assemblies. I'm just going to do floor, wall, and ceiling assemblies and use structural insulated panels to cut back on my dependency on the divisional schedule, see if I can't create some affordability by buying that product in a factory and assembling it." Had great success at first net zero energy home in North Carolina, and sold all of them pretty quickly. And it's a mix of exactly what you think it is. There's an 800 square foot version, single floor, and then there's a two bedroom version, I think just over 1,200 square foot, which he actually lives in. He moved into his model, and it was just a test to see if it could work. And that's progressed into him, becoming our build partner for Hudson Commons, and taking really what he learned there and applying what not to do to Hudson Commons so that we can continue to perpetuate this affordable living model, stable living model. And we're using a lot of volumetric construction because really it's kind of for a lot of reasons. Mostly the fact that we've got got a gap in trades in North Carolina. A ton of people moving in. I think there's 150 people a day still moving to North Carolina, and our skilled trades continue to wane. The subcontractor market is very sluggish. It's the same very robust, I should say, but it's fixed. Everybody needs the same subs, so we're going to build in factories. And honestly, the bigger part of this, Kevin, is we're going to build a factory that builds houses. That's really what we want to do, because we want to be able to control that environment to a point where it does function in a temperate rainforest. That's where we live. So for you, it would be thermodynamics, probably mostly, that you'd be concerned about, plus the occasional nor'easter and the weather coming in off of the water. But building to the enclosure and building to construction science is so important in this world.
Yeah. I forgot to mention that the 2 8-unit buildings that are just placed over here on Mills Road, right around the corner, in fact, in front of the parcel we acquired. So we have a close partnership with the property owner to get better access to the lot we have. His projects were built inside a factory in West Paris, Maine. Not Paris, France, Paris, Maine. It's a large factory where it's assembly line. Like, they build the platform and then move it along to build the walls, and it's all designed. It was done by a company called Dooryard out of I think they're out of Rumford now, but the whole building process was done inside a giant warehouse. They built houses and shipped them here, and it was an incredible feat to watch the crane lift and drop in place and see that all those things come into place. But yeah, I am all for seeing more of that happen here, especially because the weather is so unpredictable. And your build season, if you're going to do stick build, you have a very short window to try to get it done here in Maine. So you drop these things on site and you're immediately working inside. to do the finishing touch. Oh, it's incredible.
Yeah, I grew up. My first job was I was working with a carpenter, as a kid, and I just remember the urgency around being dried in for
Mm-hmm.
winter.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm in the South, and that let's just say that urgency isn't here, which brings on a host of other problems. Projects can go long, and then they're staying exposed.
Yep. Wet.
And over time, you're looking at your indoor air quality as terrible because it's been exposed for so long, and then you button it up, and now you start to grow all kinds of fun things inside of houses. And the contractor's like, it'll dry out. Well, of course, eventually it will. But what if it just never got wet? Wouldn't that be better?
Right.
So controlled environment, even in volumetric design, it's not the entire structure that's set ready. At least in volumetric design, you can do kits of parts that can expedite just the framing and assemblies. And that's where Rob started with Duke Street. What we ended up on is a full volumetric set design where we've created a 1,200 square foot model home that will be our single family home. And then we've figured out volumetrically how to create quadplexes that nest 500 square feet and 2-bedroom townhome studio walkouts into the same structure. So that allows us that product mix of missing middle that allows for that concept of upward mobility. Otherwise, everybody doesn't need 2,500 square foot homes. And I see that over and over and over again in affordable housing models where the missing middle product mix isn't right. They're based on square footage because it's based on checks, which is based on certificates, which is based on HUD, which is based on reimbursement. That's why I buried the word affordable housing and we talk about stable living because we also then want to deed restrict the ownership model. And so much of what we're talking about is based on ownership rather than renting. If you
Mm-hmm.
rent something, you treat it as if it's rented. We've all been in that car on a guy's trip or the hotel where we turn the air conditioning way down to 60 and leave the lights on when we leave. That's our human behavior. It's not ours. We don't have ownership of it. So it's not that we abuse it, but we care less about it. So another important part is that social side of the ownership model and incorporating the ownership model into stable living.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, Chris. If only there was a shorter distance between where I am in Maine and where you are in the Carolinas, I'd be right there to see some of these projects and come to fruition because this has to be the way forward. This absolutely has to be the way forward.
Yeah, we think it's scalable, Kevin. Honestly, I think we're not going to prove it out this far apart, but I think that you and I have some connections in common. The world's getting smaller. We have technologies like this today. Volumetric technology it translates real well across the internet, so you can have distributed team meetings and have an integrated project delivery team. And I think it's kind of like the concept of open source or crowdsourcing. It's better to have the depth and breadth of creativity and imagination across multiple build sites than it is to have a subject matter expert that knows everything about Maine. Because the problem is that they know everything about Maine. And that's the irony, right? They don't hear that's the old R&D model. That's putting 12 really smart people into the room and getting one really good idea at the end of it rather than crowdsourcing and getting 80 good ideas.
Right.
Having that patience in creating integrated project delivery team when you're rethinking an affordable housing model into a stable living model requires a lot more forethought. And, we're so anxious to get to the build because we're so anxious to create the product. We're so anxious to solve the problem that oftentimes it ends up symptomatic rather than systematic.
Well said, Chris. Well said. Yeah, and I think about that too. It's like, yeah, sure, I can share my experience, and when this is done, I can talk about it. But unless it's something similar, or it will never work outside of Maine. I want something to work that talk to Chris because his experience was similar but not the same. So it can work outside of this state. You just have to modify your thinking or work within the law or help change the law. And here's how you do it in that state.
Yeah.
Let's ask questions.
And a lot of that social stuff is really hard, and a lot of zoning and planning stuff is really hard because we've colonialized and we've turned into governments, and we you said it best with Euclidean thinking. But what we're doing with building science is we're looking at it really more from a biological perspective or an earth sciences perspective. Like we're in a region. If you look at One Earth, we're in bioregion N24. We're um, uh, 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 our microclimate is a rainforest, right? We're a temperate rainforest. So we're going to build to the building enclosure to mitigate mold and remediate the exterior from the interior. But then we also, in mountain conditions at just under 2,000 feet, where we'll be in Hudson, 1,400 feet, good winter, because we have elevation. So a lot of people forget that like North Carolina and Virginia have like as cold a winter as Massachusetts in a lot of ways. It
Right.
snowed last night at my son's school in Boone, North Carolina, at App State. So
Wow.
it's already snowed here in North Carolina. So, if we build almost like our hardiness zones, the way we plant, we start to get a whole better idea around the biorhythm of the region. And that's really not that hard to do. We can look at our earth zones and understand what weather patterns are there to mitigate, you want to call it climate change or, adverse weather, meteorological examples, more harsh winters, less harsh winters, hotter summers in the Southwest, water. How do we capture water and put that water back into the ground? Really, just thinking that stuff through rather than focusing on the structure and the use of the structure. This is a home, and it's for people who don't have money. But okay, great. But then what about all the other stuff? Our first conversation, you and I talked about the incentives for developers to come in to build cul-de-sac neighborhoods. Let's talk about the impact that really has on the city versus the tax revenue for a second, just so we can throw it out there.
Sure. And this is one of the reasons I really loved Newcastle is when they proposed the original change to the core zoning code, because in their comprehensive plan they talked about retention and preservation of their farmland and their forests. So we have a lot of trees. I mean, and we're smack dab in the middle between two rivers, Damariscotta River, top the Damariscotta Lake, and on the other side, Sheepscut River. So it is a lot of wet, marshy areas. So some of that's never going to be developed, but those more fertile lands where there's now farmland, I want to sustain that farmland. I don't want to see that farmland turn. And this community has recognized that as something important to them. So the initial zoning talked about having in the rural district having 5 acre. You can't develop on anything under 5 acres. So you wouldn't see subdivision happen. That didn't fly. Of course, it's back down to like a 1 acre. You have to have at least 1 acre to build on. And it's just like you're just helping more sprawl occur. So how do you help the community understand you don't want to see that happen? Because if I build a road, you have a 20 acre parcel, and you now turn it into 20 houses on a stretch of road, or bad math here because you still have a road or infrastructure coming in. And then the developer says, well, when I'm done building the road, you're going to take it over, right? Mm-hmm. Well, that road, that new infrastructure, first of all, I'd say no, never again does the town take on new roads. But two, if the pressure was there and the community said we're going to take it on, they're never going to recoup the cost of that road. When it has to be replaced or repaired, the tax value is created by those 20 single-family homes in that neighborhood. A lot of that money is going to pay for schools and all the other services and all the other roads. It's not going to pay for the road that's there. So what ends up happening is the rest of the community is subsidizing that infrastructure. So if we stop doing that and we say, you know what, let's put the density where the water and sewer lines are already or are within very close proximity to, and we build up, not out, or we infill some of those neighborhoods with those big backyards, that's where our real value will grow for our community, and that's what will stabilize the tax rate or help lower it. It also creates opportunity for fewer people getting in their car to get to their place of employment or their place of enjoyment. That's my big push, and that's what I'm trying to focus on with elected officials, is helping them understand if you really truly care about the environment, you need everybody to be living in close proximity, so you're all sharing in the bus service that runs, or you're walking to your job rather than driving 15 minutes or an hour to get to work. Let alone an electric car. There's still, what is that, embedded carbon. You've already taken a lot of material out of the ground to make that electric car. Great, not putting any more emissions in, but how many emissions were used to build that car? Yeah. What if you didn't need a car? And I live in a rural community. For me to be sharing this or trying to convince people of it, there's a lot of nods. There really are.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your approach to the system, because it's a lot of times the best thing you can do is to not do, and to avoid something from entering into the system. So if you just don't get in your car because you can walk, then that's great. I was at a meeting yesterday. There's always like a facilitator in a workshop where you have the page that's the parking lot, right? Great thought. Hang on, I'm going to put it up here. And this woman raised her hand. She was great. She's like, we've changed the parking lot to the bike rack. Can we just call it the bike rack? So I'm going to use that forever, because it's a bike rack. Why does it have to be a parking lot? And what a great reframe, right? So part of one other thought that I wanted to share with you too is that we're taking a bioregional approach. And I mentioned that just a minute ago. We're using One Earth Communities bioregion zone. So you are technically NA10, which I'm looking up right now. It's Northeastern American Mixed Forest. The New England Acadian Forest Ecoregion is a vast region that begins a thin strip intertwined in the Appalachian Blue Ridge Forests, ecoregion in eastern Pennsylvania, and proceeds through New England, including the greens, the whites, and all of Maine. All the way up through New Brunswick and most of Nova Scotia. And it looks at things like watersheds, continental divides. It just really goes well beyond, our colonized thinking of towns and cities and states. And it looks at it through the lens of a bioregion. And you are part of a much bigger system. I am part of a much bigger system. Therefore, what should we really be thinking about in the widest angle of things? You said you've got a beautiful tree canopy. You probably have good loamy soil. That's going to produce a higher quality nutrient product. That is your economic development opportunity for the future, is keeping that GDP local. We used to say this all the time, right? Think global, drink local. That was like the whole food beer craft thing at the beginning. Your world right there has 4 billion years of technology, Earth technology, that's sitting right outside of your window right now. How much of that are you taking advantage of versus how much are you extracting? Yes. And I think that's a really interesting perspective to take, that's science-based, based on bioregions, based on geomorphology, based on biodiversity. It's kind of a lens that's missing when we get to affordable housing. That seems like at the very end, doesn't it? It seems true.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's interesting because I've attended some of these conferences where it's really about building science, like how do we reduce the carbon footprint of the building landscape? And I keep screaming, like, there's still this issue of, and in Maine, 49% of our carbon footprint comes from transportation. Mm-hmm. How am I going to reduce that? And it is really thinking, I'm going to use building science to make sure that the buildings are built well, that they have a low footprint or low impact product is being used to do it, because you're extracting something from somewhere to make that. Mm-hmm. And whether or not it's regenerative or not, it's still, you're having to bring material in to build something. I just want to make sure it's built all within my downtown as much as possible. And then we subsidize that farmer who has to bring the product to market, or we all buy from that farmer to make sure that the product is brought to market.
That's right.
I'm wow, I could geek out all day with you, Chris.
Well, we should, because Orion Growth, one of my companies, is transitioning into an operating company, and this is what they do. They're working. We're moving that company from a traditional AEC model that sort of looked at problem-solving, solution-based, architecture and engineering, and sort of adding this whole operating company side to it. And we've partnered with Equibuild Solutions to create exactly this, right? The specifications and standards around building construction science. Of course, we're going to meet code. That's the minimum viable legal process that we can put on. We would never build a code. We're going to so far exceed code, it's not even funny. And we're not going to have an open discussion about it that's going to turn into a sustainability issue. Our common connection friend is Rob Leonard. He calls that, shades of green. He's had to navigate that over 40 years or 45 years. He is a stickler for building things right. So he would talk about it in terms of shades of green because he knew that eventually, if he was talking to a big, large group, there would be some consternation somewhere in that sustainability conversation. Oh, it's going to cost more. It's going to, malarkey, right? So what we're doing is we're removing all of that conversation and we're just building to net zero energy, period. And that's what EquiBuild Solutions and Orion Growth are doing. We're starting from that level when we go into a conversation and saying, we won't do the project if it doesn't do this. Because you got a million other people out there that'll do that project. So we set our quality standards at a whole different level than just feeding the dragon with RFPs and, the lowest bidder and all that stuff. You value engineer all the value out of the project as soon as you use the RFP process. So we could talk about that probably for hours and hours. But well, so listen, there's another common person in our world. As we got a few more minutes before we need to wrap up. Adam Cohen, his project, it's the Human Nest Project. Adam, and you're familiar with that project.
Yeah, and well, it's interesting. I'm going back to those building science conferences. I met Adam at a building science conference here. It was in Belfast, Maine, just up the road with GoLogic. And I sat with Adam, and he was just telling me his story of having moved from Virginia up to Canada and the challenge of getting his citizenship there, and just really nerding out with him for a while. And then he reached out to me a month or two later and said, "Hey, I'm rethinking my Human Nest project, and I'd like to get you involved, especially given my focus on the planning side of it and making sure that we're going to put up these buildings, and we're going to think about these low cost or low footprint buildings, but I want to make sure that they happen in our downtowns, and I want to make sure the zoning happens." And so, and I talked to him a little bit about the project, that parcel we acquired, and this effort to keep it. And so we're actually going to use this project as an example of the Human Nest and focus on that. So it's kind of fun, exciting, some neat stuff. I don't know all of he really zones in or hones in on some very particular elements of this that I'm excited to learn about, but I currently have little knowledge of. So.
Well, Kevin, it's awesome that we're all sort of noodling in the same place and that it will come together. I look at it as like a soup or, ingredients for a really good recipe that'll eventually be on a menu. I had the good fortune of meeting Rob Leonard at the Appalachian State Energy Summit a couple of years ago. It's NREL and DOE based, mostly mechanical, lots of microgrid conversations. The sustainable technology and built environment department runs that. And a guy by the name of Mike Kapp is the director of sustainability at App State. So you want to talk about nerding out? We nerded out, and then we nerded out so hard that we encouraged Adam to come this past year, and we really nerded out because we had one of the foremost experts in building science there this year, and we went deep and talking about how a lot of this conversation in building science and construction science has been happening for years, just never had any traction. It's the same conversation with volumetric design. You talk to general contractors and architects and engineers, it's been around forever. Well, there's a lot of unlocks that have happened in the last couple of years that are allowing us to put this puzzle together now. Our PV cost has come way down. Our battery storage has gone way up. Our ability to distribute switchgear is up. Our cost structure is down for microgrids. We can prove thermodynamics now, where we can look at thermal bridging because we have technology that associates with it. We can see it in front of us as it becomes real. There's data behind it. Yep. So like everything that we talked about 20 years ago, we're still talking about, but we can actually do it now. And people kind of don't believe it. And that's the crazy thing with the technological unlock, is that we have physics informed neural nets that are allowing us to build digital twins and blow 160 miles an hour across the house and see what happens before we build the structure, or burn a fire across the house with a fire cut that's 60 feet wide at 40 miles an hour from the west and see what happens. Did it sustain? The insurance companies love this stuff, right? Fortified roofs, lowering risk pools, like truly doing what we talked about doing. And the general consensus around traditional AEC, architecture, engineering, and construction, is that we've been talking about it for years and it doesn't exist. So that's our biggest challenge, is finding the general contractors of the future that are willing to understand horizontal and civil, create all of the basis that we need for set crews, be a set crew, finish the exterior and leave.
Right.
Because most of the componentry, all the rough-in, all the inspection, everything is just like plug and play because it's all done in the factory. So that's the biggest challenge, really, is finding sort of this standard across the U.S. where, kind of like UL did, listings on electrical, it's going to be finding the standards that make sense. Because a lot of times the thermodynamics, if you can control a building environment and the enclosure, you can use heat pumps. If you have an old house like you do, and like I do, and you put a heat pump in, probably not going to work so good. So it's like, it's not that heat pumps don't work in Maine. It's that you're not building to building science for the enclosure and the thermodynamics to then put the heat pump in.
Right.
And the contractors don't get that, and the engineers don't care, because they want to put a traditional ducted system in. They want to put traditional oil or gas burning refinery in because it's hot heat and it warms up quick and it stays longer. But that works really well when you have an older building or for whatever reason. See what I'm saying? So Those are the challenges that get us to really nerd out, that I got a feeling we're going to do at some point. We're just going to need to find a conference that we can all converge on, that's somewhere, or I'll start one. Maybe.
I was going to say, can you just start one?
Yeah, let's just start one. That's fine too. Like, we'll find the middle point, right? Because Adam's in Canada, you're in Maine. I've got a ton of town managers and city planners all up and down Appalachia, from sort of Virginia Tech, all the way down to like Greenville, South Carolina. I call it the sort of debris field from Helene. There's 10,000 square miles of area that would have been disturbed by the hurricane. And everybody's asking how we can build back better for a million different reasons. And to me, it starts with community building. It starts with stable living. It starts with civil servants. It starts with taking care of our age in place folks, and doing that through construction science and better code.
That's the conference right there.
Okay, well, let's do it. So first of all, put on your calendar, or put a reminder in, that Appalachian State Energy Summit will be next year. That has been, Joe Listerbrook came this past year. He did an amazing job. He's one of the foremost building scientists in the world. His work is just amazing. He's sort of the guru of, and we nerded out over dinner afterward to a point where he lost me because I'm not a construction scientist. I'm a reformed office developer. I just found a way to sort of put together this volumetric and industrialized construction into a better solution for housing. We don't have an inventory problem, Kevin. We have an economics problem.
Yep.
And if we continue to just put up more inventory in an extractive environment that doesn't allow for stable living for our civil servants and our aging population, we're going to go off a cliff. Yes. So, I'm not on my watch. I got kids that are going to live in stable living, and then I want to live in stable living. So I'm going to control what I can control, and I'm just going to share it all through pathway communities. And I feel like there'll be benefit that comes back from that.
Yeah, and likewise, I'm really going to focus on trying to make sure that what we create here is something that is shared and hopefully inspires other communities to take on that similar approach. So
awesome.
I hope we stay in touch and keep this conversation going. I really do, Chris.
We certainly will.
What you're working on.
Yeah, we certainly will. I appreciate your time today, and thanks for joining us. I think the open source approach is the best approach. Better together, share it all. There are no trade secrets here. It's all about stable living. So
that's right. Yes, sir.
I love it. Thanks for sharing your time with us today, Kevin.
Thanks, Chris. It's been great.